Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of We Burn Blue. How's it going, Sharan?
You know what? It's going all right. When I predicted we would get 18 points, I think I was being highly optimistic for the run-in. So I guess so far so good. We haven't lost a game in the Prem in the last 4 or 5 matches. So yeah, not bad.
Yeah, exactly. No, I felt 18 was the bare minimum, but yeah, we're looking good so far. We've got 11 points out of a possible 15, and things are looking all right. But we have a pretty tricky run of fixtures coming up, and it's quite congested at the top. And I think that leads us very well into what we want to discuss today. Do you think we make the UCL, and are we good enough to be there?
Yeah, this topic has been the center of our recent conversations over the last few weeks since the last pod. As much as we are definitely in the race for UCL, it's another thing to expect that football, and then it's another thing on top of that to think we actually deserve it. I was listening to some of the old voice notes that we've shared with each other in the last few weeks, and yeah, some of the football we're playing, maybe in the old UCL format, I don't think we could get away with it.
Yeah, yeah. It is definitely a higher level, but at the same time, and to be honest, the last few years we haven't really been in the competition. UCL hasn't been one of my top priorities to watch. But I was watching some of the football in the last couple of days, and what I felt was while the quality of the teams is higher, it's also a more open style of play. You don't really find a lot of the teams coming and setting up with a low block like they do in the Prem. So from that perspective, it might actually, maybe work in our favor.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair point. I think it's football nowadays, especially on the continent, is all like blood and thunder, right? I can't think of too many teams at that top level, except for maybe Inter, who are setting up more defensively, let's say. And like again in my review for the pod, just listening to what we was kind of saying to each other. It was that Spurs game that really highlighted our strengths, when a team sets up against us very aggressively and actually pushes up against us, right? If we can find a way through their press or over their press, and actually if Maresca allows us to play at a higher tempo and more direct, uh, we actually look really, really good in terms of, you know, in terms of the eye test, but also if you look at the players that we have, right, it suits their style of play even more.
Yes, I think that's something that we've seen as a pattern of play. There was that Adam Cleary video that was doing the rounds where basically we saw that we're more efficient with possession when we're able to play quicker and we don't necessarily boss the possession. And that's what we saw in the Spurs game, a 1-0 win. After Spurs, we had a draw versus Brentford. What were your thoughts on that?
I mean, it was an interesting game because they definitely were more threatening, especially in the first half. But I feel like the recent trend has been we really pick it up in the second half. We tend to start games very slowly. Again, Brentford have been a bogey team of ours, so just overall, looking at a nil-nil where we keep another clean sheet, right? And you walk away with a point away from home, not a bad result. Of course, in the context of needing UCL football or challenging for UCL football, it's not great, it's not ideal, but again, I think it was quite an even game. I think draw was a fair result there.
Yeah, it did feel like while we needed the points, it was going to be a tricky one. It could have gone either way. So having the draw, I think was good for the just for morale and just like okay, we've managed to hold on and it was one good point that we needed versus not getting a point there. So I was happy with that. And then Ipswich was a 2-2 draw, which if I'm honest, I was disappointed with. I was expecting us to beat them. But again, I think the manner in which we drew them, where we were down and we managed to get a goal to equalize, that was again good for team morale. What do you think?
No, I mean, this is one of those games where the context is going to be forgotten next season, right? We're just going to look at this as drop points. But you're right. again, we started the Ipswich game very strongly. I remember feeling very excited about the first half, even though we went two down, because the attacking football was actually like very, very easy on the eye. It was very fluid. Combinations were working. And of course, the quality of the opposition helps with that, right? Unfortunately, we go back to an issue we faced under even Thomas Tuchel, right? Which is finishing, right? The quality of our finishing has been exhibited as extremely poor in the last sort of 6, 7 games that we've played, especially against a team like Legia Warsaw, who you're expected to beat, right? But yeah, I think the context of this Ipswich game will definitely be forgotten, but yeah, we should try and remember this is a point earned again. Um, and their goalkeeper had a stormer of a game. I watched the highlights again, and yeah, I think his name is Alex Palmer. Yeah, he was showing up our Palmer, if
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So
yeah. It's Palmer versus Palmer.
exactly. So
Yeah.
like even in the absolute dying embers of the game, Enzo Fernandez is one-on-one, and he puts it where you would expect him to put it, and the keeper just sticks out his hand, makes a save. The good thing about the Ipswich game is we created loads of chances. And I
Yes, we
think
did.
that directness that we were able to achieve, right? We now need to be able to replicate it game by game. And obviously you do it in different ways. Like I remember discussing with this with you earlier. It really depends on the how the opposition presses us. If they invite us into their half, right? Sometimes there's no need for us to actually rush it forward. And the unfortunate circumstance is, of course, it's slightly more boring and it's a tepid game to watch, right? And fans get irritated. But by keeping the ball, you are defending in your own way, right? So not giving the ball away when the opposition's playing in a low block, right? It means that you're taking away time for them to counterattack, chances for them to counterattack, and you're methodically building your attack. It just comes to execution in the final third, which I think anyway, we'll come on to that. But conceding two goals against Ipswich defensively, we were all over the place.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, we were, and you already alluded to Legia Warsaw, but in the middle there, we did have before the Ipswich game was sandwiched between the quarterfinal fixtures in the Conference League, and on aggregate we won. Yeah, we beat them quite handily, 3-0 on the road, but the home fixture, man, that was like a blip, a 2-1 loss. I think there was a collective sort of understanding that maybe Maresca just underestimated what they were going to come and do.
I don't know. I guess so. I mean, like I can't disagree with that because, you know, the players came out the way they came out, but sometimes you just have to hold the players accountable. I think Maresca didn't change things when he should have because a loss at home against any team in any point in the season is unacceptable, right? I think that's the mentality he has been trying to instill, right? But the players came out and were extremely, extremely sloppy. I remember again against Brentford, which I believe was before the first leg of the
Correct,
Legia game.
correct.
In that first half against Brentford, we were so sloppy. And again, Brentford were actually there for the taking. We were trying to push, we were trying to create things, but individual errors really marred the first half. And I think in that Legia second leg, a bit of a tongue twister there, I think it was quite similar, but it stemmed from different reasons. I think the Legia second leg, there was just a lot of complacency. I think you could tell the effort levels were on medium at best. And really, like, you have to wonder why are we not playing youngsters who have to come on, doesn't matter what game it is, come on and prove themselves, right? You saw that Tyreek George was one of our better performers against Legia Warsaw, and it's because he's just hungry for minutes in the first team. Whereas some of these guys are strolling around like they own the place, or they just want to leave, right? So I think there were two different causes to why we were being so sloppy. One in the Brentford game, I think, was just the pressure they were putting on us and, you know, younger players being able to handle that pressure, et cetera, et cetera. And in the second game, the Legia game, it was concentration and complacency.
Complacency for sure. Yeah, 100%. And I think one of the players who epitomizes that complacency for me is Nkunku these days, but we'll get into that later. And then we had another couple of wins in the league to sort of close out this five-game run that we're talking about. Fulham, which was a 2-1 win on the road. I think that was one that really pumped everyone up.
Oh man, I was so pumped. I was so pumped. I mean, you could tell by the voice notes I was sending you, but um, I want to handle the Fulham and Everton games together because the question we're posing in this pod is uh, are Chelsea actually good enough to be in the UCL next year? And there's going to be a lot of negatives because I'm on the podcast. But in terms of positives, you can look at the Fulham and Everton games, right? Because it shows grit. It shows like adaptability. Maresca changed his game plan. He made some ballsy substitutions. We've held on to early leads and actually kept a clean sheet. You know, this is why when I look at these results, these last five Premier League games going back to Spurs, I think there are signs that even if we're not, in top form, we can get a result. And I feel like that's almost more important characteristic to develop than actually, you know, having a great performance on the pitch.
Yeah.
So we know the results matter more than anything else.
Yeah, exactly. I'm 100% with you on that because it does feel like there was a mindset switch that, just or a mindset shift rather that, just there was a switch in attitude from the players because if you go back to some of the worst performances we've had in the middle there where it was just not looking like it was working out when we were going down a goal, um, we were trying, yeah, we had possession and everything, but somehow that killer instinct, that drive, it was sort of missing in the players. And it almost feels like now they're like, okay, it's finally dawned on them that, yeah, this is in our hands right now. And it's up to us to show that we're made of, sterner stuff. And they're taking it on. I mean, Fulham, you were almost like are they going to do the double over us when they first took the lead and then obviously we get a goal back and that was when I think that was a match where Tariq George also got his first Premier League goal, right? And that came in like the last 10 minutes, so you're pushing and 83 minutes he gets on the score sheet and it goes into added time and Neto, man, like that goal was just sure, like wow, and that I think that's what you need. I think we've been missing that in the middle there. It feels like that wasn't there, and like you said, then rightly so as well, getting the early lead versus Everton and holding on. It's clutch, man, and I'm just hoping that I think it set a good foundation for us to build off, right? Those two wins especially. And we look at then what's coming up, right? It's a good foundation to build off and see what we can get from the next four fixtures because it's a pretty tough run.
Yeah, it is. To me, it still looks like the toughest run in anybody has. But particularly when you look at the games our direct rivals have, right? All the teams challenging for the UCL. I think we definitely have the toughest run in. But just going back to what you said on the mentality and how, there was that kind of period where once we went behind, or actually even if we went ahead, we knew that we were going to concede at
Yeah.
least once. How much do you think that has to do with Fofana being injured, Lavia being injured, Madueke being injured, and Jackson being injured? Because I think in his own way, Maresca has made it clear that those have been key issues.
That's an interesting point. I think that's definitely a factor. Um, I think the biggest impact player there in that list you mentioned is has got to be Jackson for me. Because him coming back. he brings something that Neto probably came closest to bringing when Jackson was out, which was that, being able to stretch the play. But even so, Neto is not good holding up the ball physically, where that's something Jackson, you can see, I think the first game he was back, we saw instantly what we'd been missing. So I think that's a huge factor for sure. The likes of Madueke and Fofana and Lavia, I mean, I think Madueke somehow seems to be he keeps coming up in these conversations, and he's good, but he's not like great. I think Fofana defensively has had a huge impact, but again, it was only a 2 game sample size where we got to look at, and we lost to Arsenal in one of those. So yes, you could see that he was bringing something different in the defense. And I mean, to answer your question, those players definitely did make an impact, but I still think that barring Jackson, the mentality thing, while yes, these players have changed things, I think something individually is also changed for me. I don't feel like it's just down to these players coming back.
So I think that you're basically saying that this is going to take a little bit more time to develop rather than just relying on players coming back from injury.
I think, yes, it's a young squad. I think if you look at other teams in the league, and specifically you look at Arsenal and where they are now, right? And I think they're a good reference point just because they went through a rebuild and they had a young squad. And one of their biggest things was mentality. And it took them a really long time to get there. And this is probably the strongest they've been. And it's come after years. And here I feel like it's been one season under Maresca, and these last few games, we might be getting ahead of ourselves, but there is something that's switched. And it could be, yes, a collective lift because there's more quality on the pitch. But even so, like for that switch to happen, there has to be something in the player's mentality. And I think it's a process. Like I said, we might be getting ahead of ourselves, but it's positive. It's positive to look at. They're positive signs for sure.
Yeah. The only thing is Chelsea fans don't seem to be patient people. But speaking of Arsenal, I think they lost against PSG in the Champions League. But hey, at least they're there challenging for it. Semi-final for them, which is a big deal. And it's still everything to play for in the second leg. But yeah, speaking of Arsenal, uh, thank God we don't have to play them again in the league this season. But we do have a tough, like we mentioned, the probably the toughest run in for the teams specifically challenging for the Champions League spots. Our next four or our last four are Liverpool, Newcastle United, and Nottingham Forest. And I mean, 3 out of 4 of these are in the top 6 teams in the league, and then United always, no matter how bad United are, we never seem to be able to turn it up against them.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very tough run in. And if we had to look at it just game by game, right? You're looking at Liverpool, who, I mean, they have been crowned champions, right? We are we gonna
Congratulations to all Liverpool fans listening to this, by the way. We don't
Yes.
want to seem like we have sour grapes. So, yeah.
Yeah, congratulations. I think we're going to be giving them the guard of honor. So, but for them now, every match is a bit of a formality, but I don't expect them to step off the gas. And they're the only team that beat us. Oh, no, City and Liverpool were the ones that beat us in that first half of the season, where up until Christmas we were looking really strong. So it's going to be a tough one. And then, like you said, Newcastle and Forest, who are then in the next 2 out of the next 3 fixtures, are direct rivals for that top five, top six set of spots. Those are going to be difficult as well. We're going away to St. James, we're going away to Forest on the last day of the season, and we have a United fixture at home. And it's true, man. It doesn't matter how bad United season is, they seem to turn up versus us. So it's going to be very interesting. And I mean, we're looking at the other squads in there and their run of fixtures. There's no doubt ours is the toughest. I mean,
Yeah. So, Prashant, having said what you've said, acknowledging that this is a very tricky run in, do you think we qualify for the Champions League for next season?
I honestly think it's going to come down to that last game versus Forest. It's not going to be so straightforward. Looking at the fixtures, Liverpool, we'd be lucky if we drew him, even though, they've won. It's not going to be just, yeah, foot off the gas. Newcastle, the match could go either way. They've been looking quite strong. And United, like you said, turn up. So if if we're not able to get the favorable results, which is basically the way I'm looking at it, a draw versus Liverpool, we beat Newcastle, we beat United. If one of those doesn't go to plan, it's going to come down to Forest on the last day. And bear in mind, Forest, even though they're level with us right now, they have a game in hand. So if they beat Brentford, they're going to be in fourth. Actually, they're going to be in third. They're going to be ahead of Newcastle, City, and Chelsea on 60 right now. So for me, it comes down to that game. And I think there's too many things that aren't in our control. If we are able to what's in our control, we get the results that we need to. And then of course on the last day we beat Forest. I think yes, we're in the UCL. What do you think?
I mean, I think if we beat Newcastle and Forest, those are 6 pointers, right? So yeah, I think if we beat those two, we will be fine. We should be in the Champions League. The question is, do we think we'll actually beat them? I really don't. I don't see how we take points from the Liverpool game. I understand that, they might be on the beach, etc., etc., but it's Liverpool Chelsea. There is some rivalry there. I don't think Arne Slot is going to let them take their um, feet off the pedal. Um, and when it comes to Newcastle, their run of form has been pretty damn good. And I think they're firing on all cylinders right now. So it's always a tough fixture against Eddie Howe's teams. United, on paper, right? Obviously, on paper, this should be the biggest gimme of the four, right? And they're not in this discussion for Champions League for a reason. But this is Chelsea United. For some reason, the mentality isn't there. We're not like fully feeling ourselves, and it tends to detract from our performance. Um, but yeah, I think we should be able to take 6 points, right? We'll find wins from somewhere if I'm just being positive on it. I'm hoping that at least one of those wins is from against United. And like you said, it comes down to Forest on the last day. I don't see us having the quality to beat Liverpool and Newcastle. I see us having the quality to beat United and Nottingham Forest. So I'll go loss, loss, win, win. And that will make it a very, very exciting, entertaining like run in. But yeah, very dramatic.
Yeah, I think I'm just hoping I'm banking on one draw in there instead of two losses, one draw, one loss, and two wins. And I think 67 would be comfortable for a fifth place finish. So we're both saying though that we're in the Champions League, and I think then the next question is if we were to get into the Champions League, what do you think is a reasonable run that you'd expect us to have in the Champions League next season, given the new format of this sort of big table and everyone playing, what is it, 4 games or 7, 8 games in against 7 different opponents before going to the knockout stages? How do you think we do should we get into the UCL?
Just to clarify, I don't think we're gonna make the UCL. Because I said if we beat Newcastle and Nottingham Forest, we will, because those are the 6 pointers, right? But I think we're going to beat United and Forest. But I think that will have us down in sixth place, I think. Because I have a feeling Forest, with their game in hand, they will beat basically they will beat 3 out of the 4 teams they play against. And I have a similar run of form for Newcastle, right? So yeah, anyway, to kind of, then let me throw the question back to you, right? Since you have us qualifying for the Champions League, right? How well do you think we'll do next season in the Champions League?
Were we to get through without any without any idea of who's next, or rather who else qualifies, I think the bare minimum is we make it through the round of 16 and get through the quarters. Just pure, spitballing here. I think I would expect that we're able to get through the knockout stages and at least get through one round of the knockouts before actually being knocked out. But this is very hypothetical. And I also say that because I don't know if a lot will be contingent on how the transfer window goes and how many players we're able to offload, because right now there's clearly a lot of glaring issues in the squad that will need to be fixed. And it's contingent on us also sorting out primarily the striker position, someone who can offer something different and, give us an option with Jackson there as well. Yeah, if we were to get in, I think at least through the round of 16, but I'm not sure if we are ready to make the jump. Having said that, and get right back into the Champions League. I don't know if it would be better if we progress through from, Conference League to Europa through to the Champions League in the season after.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair comment. But I mean you've got us in the Champions League next season according to your predictions, right? So my thing is you've kind of projected that okay, if we do make the Champions League next season, a realistic expectation is quarterfinals, right? And probably go out at that point. But I mean, firstly, with this new format they've got, there's technically two rounds of 16. There's the playoff rounds of 16, and then there's the actual rounds of 16. So I just wanted to remind you about that because do you see us, for instance, do you see us getting out of the group stage in the top eight or having to go through that playoff round?
So yeah, you're right. UEFA have made it super confusing. Quick primer, just in case anyone's forgotten. You have everyone playing the top eight at the end of each team playing eight fixtures go through, and then the teams from 9 to 24 will play each other. So it's another round of 8 games as a playoff, and then those winners go through into the round of 16, right? So that's how you have your 16 teams. For Chelsea, considering that the initial pool of teams that you're playing is wider and the quality is very varied, I think that at that stage we will be able to see off the lower European sides, and we should be able to get through in the top eight of the first, group stage essentially, and it's after we have the round of 16, and at that point is where, the quality tends to increase a little bit. So that's why I think we win our round of 16 match, get through the quarterfinals. You're down now to 8 teams. And at that point, I see us getting knocked out. Very hypothetical, of course. It's contingent on obviously qualification from other leagues and how the draw goes. But in my mind, this is how I see it playing out. I don't know. What do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I have follow-up questions because your optimism is concerning, as usual. But I think the key question is if we were in the Champions League today, do you think we make the quarterfinals?
Okay, I don't remember how the matches went because, like I said, I haven't been following it, but I think it was quite a spread of teams. And given where the squad was this season, okay, let me just frame it this way. Given where the squad was this season, I think we would have made it through to the round of 16 at least, but we would have probably done it through the playoff. We wouldn't have made it in the top eight, right? I think that's a fair assessment of how I think this season would have gone. Now, I'm counting on, of course, the squad. Like we've talked about this at length, right? You said Chelsea fans aren't patient, and that's true. But at the same time, these set of players every season they're playing together, they're learning each other, and they're building their chemistry. So we're one more season into that process, right? I don't see our core group of players getting shaken up too much. I see quality additions, right? There are a set of players who we already know have uncertain futures at the club. I expect those futures to be dealt with and most of them to be out. So based on that, considering that we're a stronger squad with more depth and quality, I think that's why I see us going through in that way. Do you agree with that assessment? How do you see the squad going?
I mean, I agree with the logic that, the more these players play together, the more like synchronization they're going to have on the pitch. But that basically implies that the manager and the squad and the players are learning, right, from their experiences together. Some of the performances we've seen recently suggests that, like, okay, whilst positive characteristics are developing, like we are able to grind out victories, right? Um, some negative ones are also developing, where there's petulance and petulance towards each other. Like, we've seen, especially the front players, the attacking players who are a bit more selfish, they tend to throw their arms up a little bit more easily when things don't go their way. And also sloppiness is kind of coming into the picture. Like we mentioned about the Legia Warsaw game and complacency, but also just sloppiness and execution in general. It's prevalent in all of our games. So there are some characteristics that chemistry can solve for, and there are some which are emerging regardless of the chemistry improving, right? So I'm curious to understand from you whether you think that for starters, Maresca is learning and he's improving as a manager, both tactically, game match wise, and like man management wise. And then whether you think the squad as a whole has actually gelled better, considering how much football they've played together now.
Man, you're really putting me on the spot here. But if you look at, so I said, right, Fulham and Everton are two games that have shown that there is some progress, right? And I say that to address both things, right? So if you look at the Fulham game, that's where you see the squad has shown that they have some mettle. They're able to understand that they need to win, and they've, continued to pressure a team, and they've scored two goals, one in the last 10 minutes and one in additional time, right? And they basically said, we need to force the issue, and they forced the issue successfully. That positive one for me, right? Everton was a game where we saw a slightly different setup and style of play. It was one of those where we were playing more direct. We weren't holding the ball so much, right? And we saw that, okay, so Maresca was technically, he had a touchline ban, and we talked about this, right? Is the change of system going to be something where he's saying, let me just test it and see how it is, and if it works, fine. If it doesn't work, I can say, well, I wasn't on the touchline and I didn't have that much control, and this is how it went, right? And that could be like one sort of conspiracy theory angle to it, but I think it was more about he was open to try something else. And it showed that, yes, he wants to have total control over games, but we've seen that having total control over games doesn't necessarily mean he's going to generate enough chances and get that win. So maybe he needs to, try the more direct line sometimes. And then again, my point from earlier where in the Champions League, you're going to see teams who are going to be setting up to be more attacking, right? So there's two conditions here. One is um, teams are allowing us to play more open, how we like, when they're not sitting compact. So that works to our favor. And in the event of where teams are not doing that, they're sitting more low. Maresca is willing to try something different, try the more direct route, play it faster, transition from defense to attack quicker instead of building it up slow. So, given that this has happened, we've seen that happen. And yes, Everton is recency bias, but there have been instances over the course of the season where we've seen him do that, right? So it means he does have that, right? So I'm counting on these two things to hold true and say, yes, the squad does reach a point where they are able to match up to those expectations. And Maresca, as a manager, recognizes that he cannot always be so stubborn. And yes, then we are, able to compete at that level. I understand I might be taking one too many swigs out of that bottle of optimism, but I'm always here for the vibes, right?
Dude, but when you talk like this, I want to believe. You bring out the inner optimist inside of me. So it's good to, it's good to hear the positive aspect of things from time to time. The bottle tastes much better than what I'm drinking these days. So what one other question I had on this, because you talked about maybe potentially less upheaval at the club compared to previous summers and previous transfer windows, right? With again potentially the manager sticking around for a change, along with there's some continuity in the backroom staff and the I guess the C-suite level at the club, and don't forget that the playing staff might actually not be rotated so heavily this time around. How many of the current 11, right? Or maybe say like current 15, right, that usually make it onto the pitch. How many of them make it into the starting 11 next year?
Interesting. Um, you know, I want to say we definitely have a new keeper. So that's 14 left with, I think out of 14, realistically, even though we have a new striker, unless it's an Osimhen type signing, I don't expect that they're gonna knock Jackson out immediately. So for me, Jackson is a player that retains his place. Palmer definitely retains his place. Between Neto and Madueke, um, I've been interested, sorry, to see how he's been setting up with Madueke on the left and allowing Neto to attack down the right. Um, which I think has been also due to Neto's work rate. But that's been interesting to see. And if he can continue to do that, that might continue to happen. Um, Midfield, man, I don't know. I think, okay, just on the face of it, out of 15 players, I think a core group of about 6 to 8 stays the same, and there's rotation amongst the others. So the likes of Cucurella, Colwill, Enzo, Palmer, Jackson, Caicedo, one of the wingers are fixed. The likes of Lavia, your other winger, who's playing next to Colwell, maybe. Is it Fafana? Does Fafana actually leave with these rumors? A new keeper. I think that's where those change. And then in on the bench, your likes of maybe Chaloba. I don't know whether he sticks around. We have to see how that goes. Sancho, whether Tyreek George continues to get, the looks in that he has been getting. Reese is obviously going to be in and around the squad. Um, Drewsbury Hall likely to leave. I'm looking at our lineup versus Everton as a reference point. So I think, yeah, if you're looking at a core group of six to eight players out of 15 staying the same, that is good continuity, right?
I would think so. I mean, like I totally agree that okay, goalkeeper, there needs to be a new one. And for me, it's Petrovic all day long, so he's not new, right? If anything, you bring back that really good keeper you already have, right? So he already knows the club. There should be some chemistry. And Reece James and Gusto, you need two players for every position, right? So that anyway, right back is sorted. I say right back loosely, right? Because yeah, us, us normies, us like normal humans, we don't necessarily invert everything we see. So yeah, the right back is sorted. I think pretty much in full agreement with you. I do. There are a lot of questions about this right centre back place, whether it's Disasi, Fofana, Chaloba. And then I think you had mentioned Mamadou Sarr, right, from Strasbourg had signed in the previous pod, right? There are a lot of options, and then don't forget Tosin, right, who can play on that in that role. But yeah, I think you've basically kind of covered the defense, uh, like summarized it pretty well. I do think going forward, it's pretty much set in stone. Jackson up top, Palmer behind him, Nkunku, please nowhere near the squad at this point. Madueke and Neto and Sancho fighting it out between the three of them, with Mudryk probably just doping even more on the side. And then you've got Caicedo and Enzo running the mid. So yeah, in terms of your point on continuity, actually, I think you're right, man. I think um, definitely less upheaval. Hopefully, we see actual upgrades in the squad. I think that's the other thing you're kind of assuming that's going to happen, right? Is if there is any change, you're adding experience and you're adding leadership and you're adding quality as opposed to raw potential, right?
Yeah. So before I get to that, right, one of the reasons I intentionally didn't speak about Gusto and James, and I want to ask you this, right, is we've seen this before and we saw it versus Everton, where when Lavia is fit, what Maresca has done is play Caicedo at right back. So he inverts into the midfield next to Lavia and Enzo pushes up, right? Do you think that he continues to do that and makes it a part of his system? Because if he does do that, naturally we're then left with two right backs. And anyway, he's been sort of playing James in the midfield, right? When Gusto has been fit. So do you actually see us needing two right backs? And you can come back to that, right? But that was basically one of the things I thought about because that's why I didn't address that. And then when you're talking about additions to the squad, right? Let's also not forget that we have Estevao coming into the squad, right? We have Andre Santos as well, right? Your guy. He's going to be there in preseason, right? So these guys are already in and around the squad in that they're on our books. They're supposed to be integrated. So realistically, if we're smart about it, we don't need to go out and break the bank for all these glaring errors. We can chop and screw with what we have. Like you said, Petrovic is an easy shout for our number one keeper because even when he was playing last season, I think he did quite well. We saw that he had really good potential. And then this season with Strasbourg, he's obviously really shown up. So if he's in there and we are able to integrate the likes of Andre Santos, we don't then miss Drewsbury Hall if he goes out. We don't miss other midfielders that are there. If we're able to integrate Estevao, because he's quite dynamic, right? From what I mean, he's a really quality player, right? So I think then the only place where we're left where okay, we need to really see someone of quality come in is probably cover for Cucurella at centre back if Fofana and I mean you mentioned Disasi. I don't think Disasi has a future here. I think Shaloba is on the fence right now. Badia Shields also on the fence. Tosin might be kept around for that expertise. But if we're able to bring in another quality defender, and then of course at a strike position to augment Jackson, I think then you're looking at a more solid unit. Yeah.
Yeah, so just on your point, your question about James and Gusto, I think you always need two right backs in your squad just because of the versatility it's going to bring. And if he decides to actually use James's and Gusto's wing ability, which is, speed, and crossing, right? Making them a bit more direct and more potent. I mean, they're probably the best crossers we have in the squad, particularly James. But Gusto also showed in his first season that he can actually whip a ball in if he wants to, or if he's allowed to, right? So you definitely keep that quality around. I would see it as a massive, massive flaw or hole in our like kind of squad building if we let even one of those guys go. I don't see him. I don't see him changing his first 11 to having like Caicedo at right back. I don't even think his second 11 has Caicedo at right back. I think this is the Everton game where we saw Lavia play was just to get Lavia more minutes than he had in the previous season. I don't think it's a serious thing where Lavia is going to be trusted for a whole season. It's not going to happen for at least another 2 seasons. He has to build so much fitness. He has to get so much game time under his belt that it's not something you can just switch back to immediately. Even if he has a good preseason, we've seen that that has made no difference, or it's made a marginal difference, right? But it hasn't made a difference where when it's needed or when it's mattered. So it would be kind of you would be shooting yourself in the foot if you then said, okay, well then we don't need Gusto because he doesn't invert very well, right? Um, and I think the other thing about James is of course the leadership, so he's not going to leave, right? So yeah, I think you keep both of them around, and yeah, I think you just hope that either he changes the role of particularly Gusto when Gusto plays, or Gusto just gets better at the role he's being asked to play because he's had a season to adapt and learn and see his gaps in his game, and next thing you know, you're in the quarterfinals of the Champions League, right?
Yes. Yeah, no, fair enough, fair enough. I mean, I want to get your view from a tactical perspective, if you saw that being a system. I don't think it makes sense. I agree with you. We should play a right back at a right back position and utilize their strengths for sure. Yeah, but otherwise, you don't see us getting into Champions League. So do you think, going back to my earlier point, do you think it would be better for us to be in the Europa League this season and use this as a transition?
I think so. I mean, I don't have us getting into the Champions League because I don't think we're good enough. That's the straight up belief, right? If we were good enough, we would not be in this situation. We'd be, let's say our destiny would definitely be more in our hands. And I would be saying that instead of maximum taking 6 points, maybe we could squeeze 7 or 8 even, you know? So th this is the thing. I don't believe we're good enough to get there, and that's why, you know, the league table never lies at the end of the day. Unless you're Chelsea occasionally and you really, really underperform your XG, right? Most of the time the league table tells you the truth. So I think when we end up sixth, we're gonna end up in the Europa League. Hopefully we win the Conference League, right? So we get into the Europa League anyway, but it would be kind of this kind of era of Chelsea under the new ownership. It would be very us to go and lose the final in the Europa League, right? So I mean in the Conference League and not make it to the Europa League. So in terms of progression, I also think it's better because I think whilst it has served as a bit of a distraction at times. And, players like Felix and Nkunku were like, why are we playing in this tournament, right? For other players, it's a chance to learn the system, learn about their teammates, and actually, put in performances that can promote them to the first team, right? Under Maresca and build trust with the manager because the manager hasn't been around very long, the players haven't been around very long. He doesn't know all of our youth players. I'm really happy that Maresca has actually played people like Tyreek George, Josh Achampong, even Sam Raksaki has gotten minutes in the Conference League, right? We haven't seen him in the first team, but so what? He got some game time, right? We saw a bit of what he can do. These sort of competitions are really, really necessary, right? Where the pressure is slightly, less compared to the Champions League. Even in the group stages in the Champions League, I think there's going to be heightened pressure from Chelsea fans' expectations, right? For instance, those expecting us to make the quarterfinals of the tournament, right? Versus you're in the Europa League, so really we don't care if we win or lose. So again, I think this squad does need at least one more year where they're learning the game itself, the game management aspect, where they need to control themselves in terms of not losing their heads when they're losing, not losing their tempers when shit's hitting the fan on the pitch, and really just focusing on their style of play.
Yeah, uh, your pessimism is I want to say it's toxic, but I get what you're saying. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, so I think you're looking at it like on the pitch, we're not quite there yet, and one more season will help us progress. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I can see completely what you're saying. But that said, off the pitch, in terms of when you're looking at revenues and everything, right? I think we really need Champions League football for that reason, right? So obviously we're sitting today and recording, and we've just had the announcement of Damac as this front of shirt sponsor for basically 4 games in the Premier League and a maximum of 3 more games in the Conference League, right? So you've that I think is indicative of how dire the situation is. So with Damac, just to give some context, they're official property development partner, right? They're building some $1 billion project in Dubai called Chelsea Residence. But they've been made front of shirt sponsor. There must be some commercial angle to it. We haven't received any news of how much, but they probably are getting, there is some fee to be front of shirt sponsor. The fact that we're doing that for a 7 game run and we've negotiated it in a way where it doesn't cover the Club World Cup and obviously doesn't go into next season, I think that's indicative of the fact that this commercial team is banking a lot on Champions League qualification to increase the potential revenues you get from a front of shirt sponsor. Plus, of course, the other aspects, right? You're looking at more match day revenue coming in, you're looking at more broadcast revenue, right? There's more opportunities for commercial revenue coming in through just being in the Champions League, right? There was also talk of like the Jordan partnership, which wasn't going to happen unless we were in the Champions League, right? So for those reasons, while yes, I see your on-pitch rationale, I think if you look at the wider picture, we would be better off with Champions League qualification because it just gives us more leverage to milk. I mean, we're still going to be in a European competition regardless as things stand, right? But Champions League is just the best form, right?
I mean, there's no doubt there, right? But it's not up to us alone. So if the question is, do you think we'll make it? The results are on the pitch, not off the pitch, right? Off the pitch, I agree with you what you're saying because we need it. It's not that we want it. We absolutely need that revenue. Particularly with, PSR stuff becoming way, way more strict and points are actually being deducted from teams, right? And UEFA can easily follow suit or be equally as strict, right? We need additional revenue, and if I see this whole front of shirt sponsor thing as a big fumble. I again I think you've been a little bit positive on the view that okay, they've taken Damak's money or like the agreement with them for the 7 games to tie us over till the end of the season, where we can then hopefully get somebody better, right? But if that's relying on Champions League football, which is not guaranteed, I would ask you, is that really the smartest approach when your club needs money, right? We're not in a good financial situation. The only reason we've made a profit last year, quote unquote profit, is because, the women's team was sold for 198 or 200 million, whatever it is, from entity to entity. And that was put on our books as a sale. So, we live again for another year, right? But coming back to the point, we definitely need the money. 100% agree. The problem is you can't even sell those players that you overpaid for by tens of millions of pounds, and you're paying them ridiculous wages, right? For their reputations, which are actually not very high, right? You can't even sell them and get the money back for them in the market because the only team that was actually paying these valuations was Chelsea, right? So all of that mismanagement just adds extra pressure on the players and the manager who have to succeed. But frankly speaking, I don't think they're ready for the Champions League. And that's why I say a year in the Europa League where the stakes are slightly higher. It's another way in to get into the Champions League by the end of that season, right? Um, it allows us a little bit more room to breathe on the pitch. But again, right, like the off the pitch considerations is a completely different world.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, Just to be clear, I don't agree the Damak thing is a smart piece of business. I think they may have got some money, but I don't think it makes sense at this point. Like with 7 games to go, and if you wanted to do it, you should have at least had it through the Club World Cup, in my opinion, because that's going to be in the US. It's right, it's in the US, and there's a wider audience, so you're leveraging that. But yeah, I mean, look, a lot of it comes down to, like you said, it's in our hands. It's the results on the pitch, and it's these next 4 games. So there is, of course, the matter of the semi-final versus Joe Garden. We're recording right before, and hopefully by the time you're hearing this, we've beat Joe Garden away, and we've done the business so that when they come home, it's like it's kind of like the Warsaw game where it's not such a high stakes situation, and we go into the final versus Fiorentina or Betis. In my opinion, it is strongest chance of silverware we've had recently.
I think we lose in the final, mate.
All right, all right. But speaking of silverware, can we have a round of applause for the Chelsea women, man? Complete and utter domination, dude. Like six in a row, and they're unbeaten so far. It's mental.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's it's amazing that we have this release, right? Because otherwise, I feel like we wouldn't be smiling so much these days, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, but to be fair, even on with the women's team, right? They obviously got knocked out of the Women's Champions League. Barcelona did us dirty, but we beat United, confirmed champions, and we're still competing for the other two cups. So there's a chance for a domestic treble under Bompastor in her first season. So that's really, really something. And that's also with the likes of Sam Kerr not in the squad because of the whole whatever aggravated assault case she had, and Lauren James has been injured again. So it shows what can happen when you build a squad smart and you have real strong depth, right? And consistency, because we're coming into Bumpas's first year after Emma Hayes has built that squad into like a machine, really.
Yeah, I mean, credit goes to Emma Hayes, but you know what? Also, Bompasso coming in, I think in terms of a bigger picture on the league, coming in at a time where, yeah, it's hard to transition from an into a new era, right? She has been backed, but so have other teams. Other teams have actually spent a fair amount and invested into the women's clubs' infrastructures, right? In terms of recruitment, in terms of setups. So I think to achieve this in your first season, um, it's pretty damn impressive. You know, it speaks a lot to the resilience at the club, at least at the women's side of the game. And hopefully, you know, Bompasta can kind of maintain this winning mentality because great, you've done it once, it's fresh. It was something that, you know, it's part of the ambition, right? To do it again, it's always the toughest thing. So it remains to be seen whether they can maintain this dominance going forward. But you know what? For now, we just celebrate the trophies that you know the women are putting. I hope we share trophy cabinets. That's all I'm thinking right now.
It'd be a pretty big cabinet if we are sharing it, though. I mean, we do have some good stuff, and I mean, I'm hoping we get
Needs to
this.
be way more humble. The men haven't done anything.
No, but I mean, I'm hoping we get the Conference League just because that's just probably that's the one thing we haven't won, right? So we win that, and again, we're back to we can say we've won it all, right?
Yeah, until the Club World Cup.
We've won the Club World Cup.
Yeah, but the new format. And then when FIFA or UEFA, whatever, they create new tournaments or they change the names, then we'll have to do it all over again.
That's the challenge, right? That's why winning the Conference League is the that's why I'm saying we need to do it.
So just everyone, you heard it here first. Prashant saying the biggest medal on offer this season was the Conference League all along, and that was Maresca's game plan. So we're all right. We're doing okay. We're meeting expectations.
Maybe the club's playing some 4D chess with us.
I don't know who they're playing 4D chess against. It's against nobody else, bro. I can tell you that much. It's all in-house. It's all in-house, man.
Yeah, well, on that note, uh, any parting words, Sharon?
I think it's going to be a very entertaining end to the season. For the men's in particular, because there is, you know, Champions League on the line, a title on the line. Can't really complain about it too much. It's still going to be a lot of fun. We may just get some absolute drubbings in these last few games. So, you know, in terms of a fan's perspective, I think we should just maintain patience. If we drop out of the UCL positions by the end of this and it's Europa League, it's still a good season. You know, I think overall, you know, we'll have this discussion in a season review pod, maybe in the next two or three pods. But I think overall, you can't deny the positive signs, and it's more about the faff that's going on behind the scenes that really needs to be sorted. So let's just get behind the boys for the next 7 games, hopefully, touchwood seven, if not six, and see how it goes.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm with you on that.
So there you have it. Will Chelsea make it to the Champions League? Let us know what you think over on X at We Burn Blue Pod. And if you enjoyed this pod, give us a follow and leave us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And definitely share this with other Chelsea fans. All right, till the next one.